Hello, my name is Christopher Nuland. I am a technical marketing manager with Red Hat, specializing in open source AI communities. So this is a special talk for me. It's a non-technical talk. I think this is actually my first non-technical one I've done out of the probably hundreds that I've done worldwide, and it's a really important topic to me, personal topic to me, about something I went through over the last 4 years and how that impacted my involvement in the open source community, and really how it shaped my view in the open source community. It really changed my perspective of how I interact with others, and I would say it even goes beyond open source, even to how I work with my family, how I'm working with my friends. So let's dive in, talk a little bit. So a little bit about myself. I mentioned that I'm a technical marketing manager over AI. Specifically, I'm targeting more communities. So a lot of open source projects like Kubeflow and VLLM right now. Previously, I was a consultant at Red Hat, specializing in AI and metrics-driven transformation for organizations. So I did that for about 6 years, and then switched over to our AI BU so I could be more focused on more of the community side. And actually, what I'm talking about today was a main driver for that switch over to being more community focused. And then, as I mentioned, I'm currently leading enablement around OpenShift AI, and from a community standpoint, VLLM. This is my family. We did recently have another child who's not on this picture, so that was about 3 months ago. She was a bit of a surprise, but so we are a family of 6 now, but these are my 3 oldest here, so we'll have to get a new photo this year. Funny story, my daughter was, my most recent child was born on Valentine's Day. She was born a month early while I was at a conference. So I was flying home midair, and then when I landed, and I had no Wi-Fi on this flight either, it was terrible. And as I landed, I started getting pictures from like all my family that the baby had been born. But yeah, this is my oldest daughter is 9. She's really into computers and starting to get into the concept of open source. Super nerdy. My middle son there is obsessed with Legos as well. So he just sits around playing Legos most days when he can. So still not sure about my third there. He's a little crazy. So before I dealt with some health issues, I would say I was not really in a healthy position anyway. I was involved in about 12 different open source projects. I was a maintainer of 2 of those, and I just really struggled with saying no. And I really associated the idea of open source contribution to the amount of lines of code that I was contributing. And that really was an identity for me. It was an issue. It wasn't good for my family life. I would spend a few hours with my family in the evening, and then even after work, I would go back to my computer and be programming all night. And I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I just took it to a place where it was bad. I was not taking care of myself. I had my identity wrapped around code rather than people and the community side of what I think actually makes open source thrive and what makes it really great. So just involved in too many projects. My value was very much in, like I said, the lines of code that I was producing. And I was also, on the flip side of this, I was also judging others based off of that too. I really looked at people's value as how much contribution of lines of code were you providing into these open source projects. And as a maintainer and a contributor, that wasn't healthy either. It wasn't building good relationships within these core communities. So I've had some health issues my whole life. I wasn't quite sure what it was. There were some ideas. This happened from the time I was like maybe 10 years old to about 22 years old. And then I had a period about 8 years where I felt perfectly fine. So I kind of stopped that journey of figuring out what was going on because I just got better. And given the symptoms I was having, most doctors just figured I grew out of the issue. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I have. But in 2022, after I had my first case of COVID, so I had, thankfully, I had the vaccine. We were taking care of my elderly parents who have health issues as well. So we were, even for the United States, we were very stringent. Got the vaccine, and then about 3 months later, I got my first case of COVID. Thankfully, it was pretty mild, but these symptoms started happening about a month afterwards. I would randomly start feeling very faint. I never blacked out, but there's a phrase called gray out, where like my vision will go and I'll have to like sit on a wall very quickly. And this happens basically anytime I stand, anytime I'm walking, anytime I'm exercising, and it changed my life. It was very frustrating. It was one of those things where I had to completely redo my life. Not just in what I'm talking about here with open source contribution, but just, how do I even get up to go to the bathroom, or how do I, how much time do I give myself to go somewhere? So over the course of 2022, 2023, I saw about I had 30 different doctor visits over 12 different doctors. And then thankfully, finally, they figured out what was wrong with me, and I'll mention that here. But during that time, I was feeling very defeated because of previously, I had my value tied into the amount of code that I was doing. How many lines of code was I contributing? How many projects was I involved in? And when you're dealing with health issues, you have to put that aside. You need to be conserving your energy. You need to be. It makes you refocus what's important. You can either take it a really bad direction where you feel defeated, you let mental illness take over, or you take it a direction where you take control of it and you realize your own boundaries. And I'll talk a little bit about how I set some of that up. So I was eventually diagnosed with something called hyperPOTS. You may be familiar with the term POTS. It's kind of what I was describing when you stand up, you feel dizzy. The reason why it took a while to diagnose this is because I have a very rare form of this, and I've had it since I was a child. All COVID did was just make it worse and come back, basically. So the symptoms I had when I was a child actually were related to this condition. And I won't go too much depth in here, but my adrenaline levels are constantly going up and down. My ability to manage my adrenaline is just not there. It will overcompensate or undercompensate. When that happens, it causes your blood pressure to make extreme changes. And that's what causes the dizziness. It's what causes the fainting. And thankfully, through medication and things like exercise, diet, and just lifestyle changes, it can be very easily managed. But it still means I need to be regulating my stress, which gets very interesting when we start talking about open source, especially the way I was handling it. And just make sure that I am getting enough sleep, eating well, really focusing on what's important, really. So thankfully, I had that diagnosis. I was able to get a lot better, but it's still a day-to-day struggle. Like even standing up here, the room feels a little wavy at times. So it's just something now that I've gotten used to. So it was definitely life-changing. I had to start thinking about my physical limitations, and this applied directly to how I was working with open source projects. I went through a period of some mental health issues of just trying to reevaluate my identity, because my identity was really in, like I said, lines of code, how much I was producing, how many projects I was in. And thankfully, I had my family, I had friends who really were encouraging me to really reevaluate what those priorities were. So I started assessing what really mattered. The first thing I did is I wrote down a list of all the open source projects I was a part of. And this is interesting. I realized 3 of them were basically dead. I was breathing life into something that really wasn't there. And I wasn't really getting anything back from that. There wasn't really any value. I did some research and found out there were better alternatives even. So through that evaluation, I was like, man, to use the English term, I was kind of beating a dead horse. So a few of those projects I was able just to close out and just be like, I put a link in there like, hey, you should probably just check this out. It's much better. Some of the other projects I was involved in, I realized that I could be focusing more energy on building up other contributors from a community standpoint than necessarily the lines of code. Like I have the ability to say no. I have the ability to set boundaries. And ultimately, I have the ability to enable other people to help. So if there's one theme through this whole talk, it's really about community. Open source to me is about the community ultimately, and going through these health challenges is what really opened my eyes to that. It's not about me as an individual, it's about us as a community in these different projects that we're working on. I then had to assess really how much energy do I have, and where do I bring the best value with that energy. So how many hours in the day is healthy for me to be focused specifically on open source, unrelated to my job? It's a little blurry now because my job is specifically around open source communities. But at that time, I was doing consulting for Red Hat. So I set aside an hour in the evening to check emails, check different community progress, different PRs. And then once that time was up, it was up. And that was the boundary that I had to set for myself. I think it's going to look different for everybody. For me, it's a pretty low amount just because of the amount of energy I have dealing with this condition. But ultimately, everyone has a number. Everyone has a healthy number of what does their contributions look like. And then I think a big thing for me too was reevaluating what it means to be part of the community. And so I talked about kind of like the energy side of it and how much I do and where's my value. But it really opened my eyes to also like I said, the community side here, where it's a more of a focus on belonging to the community rather than producing. And a lot of this goes back to what I was talking about with like building up others, talking with others. I had a bad habit of just like skipping community meetings and not really caring, or I would just show up at like KubeCon or other Linux Foundation conferences and just shake some hands and then go away. This health crisis really opened my eyes that the value is in the people, and through that, there's a lot of value in me taking my knowledge and spreading it around and applying it to others. And my experiences, being able to mentor other people, is something that I've really started to get more into the last 3 years after dealing with these health issues. And then making sure that I'm also being mentored, finding people who are more experienced than I am, letting go of my pride and ego, and realizing that through these health issues, I have vulnerability and I need others to be able to succeed. And that's not even going through just this subject. For me, there are times when like I have to go to an airport about 3 hours early because there's some days where I just have to get a wheelchair. It's rare, but if I am having some flare up of my symptoms, it's very hard for me to get through an entire airport. And it took me a really long time to accept that. I didn't want to be that 35-year-old who's being wheelchaired through the airport. But then I had enough crisis at airports where I realized, hey, this isn't smart. I need to reevaluate this. I need to be okay with vulnerability and getting help from others. And I think this applies into what we're doing in open source communities as well. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, hey, I can't do that right now, or I have to change the way I'm involved in this project. And ultimately, it's more healthy for the project itself, where the you setting boundaries and focusing on the community side is going to make other people stronger, and it's going to make the community stronger through having good expectations of what your involvement is, and ultimately preventing certain things like burnout or mental illness that can actually have more detrimental effect on you and even the community itself. So I went from 12 projects down to I put here 2. I think it was more like 3. Actually, now I think about it. Like I said, I got rid of a couple that I was maintaining and realized there were just better things out there. And then I really tried to figure out where was I bringing the most value community-wise. So I brought it down to 3 different projects. I was doing some AI work at the time, but I was more involved in migrations and metrics-driven transformation at the time. So if you're curious, I was very involved in the conveyor project. I was doing some work in some of the metrics-driven transformation open source projects, and then the namespace configuration operator, which is part of Kubernetes. So those were the 3 ones I was really focused on afterwards, because I knew I was bringing value, and there was good communities there that were, there was a 2-way relationship with the community. And then, like I said, just setting up those expectations of what I can do physically, and making sure that I'm focused not just on my work, but my family and my friends and my community, not just the open source community, but the community at my home, making sure that I was seeing my parents more, my sibling, really just it really opened my eyes to what really matters in life when you go through these types of, you know, health episodes, I guess I'll describe it, or awakening. One of the things I've been doing is building in more rest and recovery time. So I make sure that on weekends I set aside a certain amount of time for what I'm doing open source wise. But really, I try to stay away from the computer on Saturdays and Sundays, making it focused towards, like I said, family and friends. Having that schedule has helped me a lot, because before I didn't have a schedule. I was just doing what I needed to get done, how many lines of code I felt like I needed to be producing, and making sure that I stick to these boundaries is important. One thing that I do too is I let people know about my health issues up front when I'm in some of these communities as well, and just say, hey, I'm going to do my best to get this done at this time, but just know that sometimes I'm out for a day or 2 because of health issues, and it's not anything that's life-threatening. I'll be back like a day later, but just know that setting those expectations with other community members is important, letting them know that, hey, I can be out. And then ultimately, I recognized that my chronic illness was ultimately benefiting me. I think in the end, if I didn't go through this, I think I'd still be living a very unhealthy lifestyle, and a lot of stress, a lot of potential mental illness I wasn't addressing. And this was very eye-opening to me. And as I wrote here, it's really become a lens for me to view the community aspect. And I don't really view it as a wall anymore or something preventing me from being part of these communities. So fast forward now, funny part is I still code regularly. I still have involvement in some of these communities, but my biggest impact and what I've become most known for have been more on the enablement side. So as I was dealing with some of these health issues, Red Hat um, recognized that I needed to probably make a change. I was doing consulting where I was juggling a lot of different customers, and that just became very challenging, especially with health issues and unpredictability of when I could do work. I still can do work. I can do work regularly. I can travel. It's just sometimes I won't be available right at 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning if there's an issue with a customer. So I switched into our AI BU about 2 years ago, becoming a technical marketing manager focused more on our AI communities. And this was a great change. It's been awesome. I love my job. I love everything that I do. Like I said, the line between work and community has been completely blurred now because it's a big part of what I do. But I've been able to travel the world. I put on events for different organizations and different events. Like I go to conferences like this and just speak on different open source AI technologies. Some of it can be from a technical standpoint. Some of it can be part of like AI responsibility, sovereignty issues, a variety of different things I'm speaking on right now. And that all relates back to AI communities like VLLM, Kubeflow, a variety of the big ones right now that I am an advocate for. So this has been great. Another thing I've been doing, I don't know if you've seen a woman around pushing a stroller here at the event. That is my wife. So she is traveling with me with our youngest. So I travel a lot for work, and the agreement that we have is that once a year, no questions asked, I bring her on a trip. It doesn't matter where it is. I always make sure that I'm putting back some money for that every year. And that just helps our relationship. It helps our relationship that she knows, hey, I can come with you at any time. The funny story last year was last minute, I was asked to go to KubeCon Paris. Originally, I was not going to go. It was 3 weeks ahead of time. And then someone wasn't able to make it, and they asked me to replace a session there. And so I told my wife, hey, I'm going to Paris in 3 weeks. And she said, I think you mean we're going to Paris in 3 weeks. So last year, she came to Paris with me for KubeCon. And then this year, she wanted to come here. She'd never been to this area of the world. And it's been a joy being able to travel. It's been a joy that not just me have taken a step back, but she's also taken a step back to focus more on her mental health, being able to support each other as well. So she deals with extreme anxiety. And I've been able to support that more now by changing my roles, changing my focus, and being less focused on career and money and being more focused on what really matters. That's people. So the kids that you saw do travel with us sometimes. I have the youngest obviously here with us. When we're traveling domestically in the United States, we very often will travel together if school doesn't conflict with anything too. So that's been something that's been very healthy for us. We've been able to travel together. I've gotten my oldest, who's really into computers, into the idea of open source, and she's very opinionated already, which means that's perfect. She'll do great in the open source community. And then, ultimately, like, life is short. See the world, meet new people. This picture was done a few weeks ago while I was in Beijing. I was asked to come and speak on VLLM and talk about how things are changing with AI, how we're seeing advancements with AI models. And like I said, that was no code. There's no code involved with that. But 4,000 people actually attended that session. And that's how I'm now giving back to the community, being an advocate and still writing code sometimes, but more so focused on helping others, informing others, educating them, and building them up in the community. So takeaways, you're not alone. I've met many other people now who've dealt with health issues. It's very, very common, very more common than I think we even realize. I think a lot of the problem is we're just not ready to talk about these issues, be vulnerable with these issues, but just about everyone's dealing with some type of, of health issue. Respect energy limits and set boundaries for yourself. Adjustments aren't weakness, ultimately, they're wisdom. And your contribution still matters, no matter what type of contribution you're doing. Is it if it's coding, if it's testing, if it's just being a community leader, all of it brings value to what we're trying to achieve ultimately within the open source community. So with that, this is an open discussion time. So I really want to hear from you. If you have any questions for me about how I've dealt with some of this, or want to share some of your own experiences. Typically, when I've run this in the past, it's been kind of more of a roundtable event. So I just open the floor if anyone has anything they want to say. Yeah, so I'll repeat the question. The question is about how the difference between setting boundaries between remote work and office work. So, are you going to an office hybrid? Are you going full time? And what relates to me? Thankfully, I've actually done both recently, so I have two sides of that perspective. Uh, I started remote in the position I am now, and then I switched to being 3 days a week in the office a year ago. So that was a tough transition for me, but to the point that you made in the question, it did help me set boundaries because there was a clear time when the second I get on the train home, that's clicking off. It's the time where I'm done. Not even going through the door at home. It was the train. So typically on the train, I'm getting caught up on articles, or I try to look at things that are not work or community related. Read a book. Kind of set that like reset switch. When I was working remotely, I had to set timers, and I was fortunate enough at the time, this was before we moved to where we're at now, that I had an office space that was away from everything else, and that was the work area. What really I really struggled was when there was a small period where we are now, where I don't have an office. My office was my bedroom, and that is where I really struggled. It was a very struggle because what do I associate that room with? Do I associate that room with work? Do I associate it with sleep and rest? And that's where I had some boundary issues of, I would ignore that alarm that went off. Like, I'll just 10, 15 more minutes. Next thing you know, it's 2 hours later. So I started relying a little bit more on libraries and cafes nearby, and making sure that, yes, I would do work at home. That was fine. But if I needed to do like heads down programming work, I would go somewhere, and then there would be some natural limit of that time. Maybe the cafe closes at 5 or library closes at 7. And then I had a clear time when I needed to transition. But I had to do that, or else I would just start creeping back into the bad habits of just staying up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And that wasn't good for me. Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 So that's a great question. So I would paraphrase that as my upbringing and my culture made it so that I needed kind of a crisis before making changes. How do I see culture maybe changing in that area, and how do I help with my own children on how they handle these types of issues? So I think I think it starts with work-life balance first, and having good work-life balance. I did not grow up in a home that had that type of good balance. It was my dad was working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, traveling all the time. And that's what I associated with as success. So that's something I'm trying not to do with my kids. I'm trying to spend time on the weekends. I'm trying to show them that I close the laptop and then focus on my family and my friends and my community. I think a flip side of that is also being able to accept things like mental illness, because I think that always comes with chronic health issues. If the mental illness is a major cause or it's a symptom, it usually always comes in there somewhere. Um, and I think just being able to talk with that a little bit more, I think is important, and that I think helps identify some of these issues earlier than if you let it become a crisis point. I would say a third issue is more on the medical side of having the ability to have more vulnerable conversations with doctors as well. I think part of my issue was that I was not being vocal enough or championing myself to my doctor, basically saying, "Hey, there is something wrong here. We need to get to the bottom of it." A lot of times it was, "Well, it's just in your head," or "This isn't a real issue." So now, even my daughter's been experiencing some mild health issues, and we have said, "Hey, no, this is serious to us. We'll get advice from someone else." I'm not afraid to just go talk to someone else about these issues, because I think if I had been able to identify this when I was a kid, when I had this, I think I would have taken more precautions as an adult to not let it get to the point that it got. Because I've had this my whole life. It's just that COVID made it worse and made it come back. So I think those three things are very critical. And to your point, it is all about talking to my children about this, enabling the next generation to be more vulnerable, be able to talk about their health, talk about a work-life balance, and really some of the core parts I've been talking about here, making sure that's being carried on to the next generation. Yes, yes, sure, yep. You're good. Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Uh, I have to have a couple days in between. Oh, excuse me. So the question was, how do I prepare for travel to deal with these types of health issues? What do I do while I'm traveling? As I mentioned, for most people, like they'd say 2 hours at an airport, I usually show up 3 hours beforehand, just to give my time either to get through the airport or recognize that my health issues are worse that day. So then I'll ask for a wheelchair. Like I said, it goes out that vulnerability, being okay with the vulnerability that I actually need a wheelchair. Uh, Being able to space things out. So I'll just have to tell people, no, I can't make that, or I need 3 days in between these two events, because I'll need just one day where I'm just at a hotel, and just not doing anything, just resting, and um, and that part goes into the scheduling. I think something that I am coming to the conclusion of now is that there is a timer on how long I'll be able to do this type of travel. I think, because I do probably about 30, 40% of my time on the road, I'm starting to find that that's going to have to dwindle. And that's just as I'm getting older, as my kids are getting older. And just that acceptance that there's a timer on this travel in this phase of my life. And I'm also going to have to look at what's the next phase of life for me as my kids get older and as I still deal with this chronic illness. I also have things that I travel with specific for my condition. I always make sure that I have everything that I need, double check, triple check my medication, make sure that I have a whole bag of just items related to my condition that I need that make travel easier for me. So that's a big part of my travel plans and ritual, I guess you would say. So thank you so much. We're out of time, but I really appreciate you coming. And I hope if you're dealing with this or dealing with someone that's dealing with health issues, I hope this was beneficial to you. Thank you.